We do. So earlier this morning, Minneapolis was the site of an ICE officer-involved shooting. We've preliminary information that has been coming out know that allegedly the woman who was shot was a woman, according to Mike Tobin, who is there still on scene. Mike Tobin, if you're there, let's get the latest from you. Oh, okay. So we're going to bring it back to the couch as we talk about this. Harris, you were monitoring the tweets that were coming out from leadership there in Minneapolis, and it seemed that immediately upon learning of this ICE-involved shooting, we do know that all ICE agents are safe, but that leadership there was tweeting out about getting ICE out of Minneapolis, although Mike Walz allegedly has urged people to stay calm. What are your thoughts as this develops?
Well, leaving the politicians doing what they often do, Emily, I'll get to that in a second. But with this situation, just consider the backdrop here. You've got a state that's steeped in fraud. You've got federal agents on the ground arriving this week, taking a look at the $9 billion. And some have said that's a modest number.
ICE shooting gone wrong as ICE agent shoots and kills a woman in Minneapolis. Watch this.
We'll see as the investigations, plural, shake out. We know that the U.S. Congress and the oversight chairman, James Comer, they're looking at this. They are bringing in people. So you've got that going on there. You also have a situation that Sandra just mentioned to me, too, where you've seen a lot of police officers leave. I mean, it's not a friendly place for cops. And because law enforcement isn't allowed to do its job. And so you've had a whole lot going on in the backdrop of this. And why is that important? All eyes on Minnesota right now. You have ICE agents on the ground trying to do what the president's goal is to do, and that is to clean up illegal immigration, violent, worst of the worst, out of the country first. ICE centers, they're trying to protect those detention centers, and our ICE agents have been under threat. A whole lot going on. It is a concoction for anything to happen. So we've been watching this story without a lot of detail, but now take a look at the middle of your screen. This is what we heard early on, and it didn't really make sense, Emily.
Yeah.
So this was a shooting, but it was a ramming. Now we can see the remnants potentially of that with the white car and a vehicle behind it. We don't know all of the details or how that ended up, but we know that that's been a focal point as all of these vehicles now are lining the street. Residential area. Imagine what that feels like. You're looking outside, you've got people, law enforcement, you've got federal agents, everybody in your yards on that street. And now finally some details that a woman reportedly has been shot. We don't know conditions of people. We don't know any of that from the ground. But in the meanwhile, we have Jacob Frey of Minneapolis. I'm aware of the shooting involving ICE agent at 34th Street in Portland. The presence of federal immigration enforcement agents is causing chaos in our city. He tweets this in the middle of all of this. We're demanding ICE to leave the city immediately. We stand rock solid with our immigrant and refugee communities. I don't know what he knows, but we're going to need to know a lot more information like the facts and not his opinion.
Unbelievable. So let me get this straight. Before a single fact is confirmed, before anyone knows the full story, before the dust has even settled, Mayor Jacob Frey priority isn't to ensure the public safety or gather information. It's to fire off a tweet demanding federal agents who are literally enforcing federal law to leave the city immediately. Talk about jumping the gun. This isn't leadership. It is political pandering at its most cynical. This isn't just a bad look. It is dangerous. When a city chief executive immediately demonizes federal law enforcement, what message does that send to the public? It tells them that ICE agents are the problem, not the individuals who might be breaking the law, or in this case, allegedly weaponizing a vehicle. It provides the very ammunition to the chaos it claims to be against. It is like a fire chief showing up to a 5-alarm blaze and immediately tweeting, "Get the firefighters out of here. They are causing chaos with their water hoses." It is beyond laughable. And then he forces in the "We stand rock solid with our immigrant and refugee communities" line. Look, supporting communities is one thing, but that shouldn't come at the expense of upholding the rule of law or protecting federal officers. These are not mutually exclusive concepts unless you are intentionally trying to create division or chaos for the political gain. This isn't about compassion. It's about political drama, and the stage is set with real lives at stake. We need facts and not political charge sound bites. designed to anger a base. Because this is an absolute clown show.
Now, we had a reporter on ground earlier, Mike Tobin, who talked to us about the allegations thus far. This ICE officer-involved shooting involved the person who was shot, a woman, and allegedly involved a ramming incident, which there on your screen you can sort of see. If it pulls out further, you'll see what looks like three vehicles that were sort of tangled together. And then you see there that group of people that, as Mike Tobin described it, sort of descended on the site of where it occurred. Now, there is tape keeping those people at bay. And he talked about sort of the knee-jerk reaction of these individuals that often do descend on where there is an ICE officer-involved situation. We see here now plenty of space in between those protesters or gatherers there and what looks like the scene of that shooting, or at least the ramming. John, your thoughts as we see this unfold before us?
Well, Emily, of course, we need to see more facts.
Yes.
But I can tell you the broader picture here is this is what's going to happen in sanctuary states like Minnesota or California or New York, where local officials, if they're not tolerating or at least encouraging resistance to the execution of federal law. No one doubts here that people here are in violation of federal immigration law, that ICE agents have the right under the Constitution to go and execute warrants, to go and detain people in violation of that law. And state officials are not allowed to do what the mayor, according to Harris, just said, kicking federal agents out of a state. That is impossible under the Constitution. And this mayor, once again, has showed he's not fit for office.
Also inciting violence.
Yes, he's encouraging resistance to the execution of federal warrants. And so, unfortunately, you are going to see people in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, rush out to try to stop federal agents from doing their duty. And these state officers, instead of encouraging it, instead of saying federal officers should be kicked out, they should be arresting and prosecuting people there.
John, we have more facts now. Our own Michael Tobin, who's reporting on what is happening on the ground there in Minneapolis, is confirming that today ICE officers in Minneapolis were conducting targeted operations when rioters, he say, began blocking ICE officers, and one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle, attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them. An act of domestic terrorism. An ICE officer, fearing for his life, the lives of his fellow law enforcement, and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots as a response. The alleged perpetrator was hit and is deceased.
There it is, the truth, finally cutting through the political noise and the premature outrage. This wasn't some random incident. This was a targeted operation where a violent riot person weaponized a vehicle, attempting to run over and kill law enforcement officers. Let's call it what it is, domestic terrorism. And an ICE officer, fearing for his life and the lives of his colleagues and the public, acted in self-defense. This isn't a shooting involving an ICE agent. It is an ICE agent defending himself and others from a deadly attack. This changes everything about the initial narrative, Mayor Frey's tweets, and his premature condemnation of ICE. His demands for them to leave. They weren't just misinformed, they were actively harmful and irresponsible. He demonized the very people who were facing a life or death situation, all while trying to score political points. It is a disgusting display of priorities, and this isn't an isolated incident. As the report states, assault on law enforcement are skyrocketing and death threats are through the roof. This is the direct tragic consequences of constant demonization of our officers by the sanctuary politicians. They sow the seeds of hatred and distrust. They encourage defiance and then act surprised when violence erupts. This is a predictable outcome when you constantly paint law enforcement as the enemy. Our officers go out every day, putting their lives on the line, and they deserve our support, not to be thrown under the bus by the politicians more concerned with their woke credentials than public safety. This is a fearful reminder of the dangers they face and a damning indictment of those who give ammunition to the fire.
Thankfully, the ICE officers who were hurt are expected to make full recoveries, and we do pray for them. This is a direct quote coming in now. This is the direct consequence of constant attacks and demonization of our officers by sanctuary politicians who fuel and encourage rampant assaults on our law enforcement, who are facing a 1,300% increase in assaults against them and an 8,000% increase in death threats. This is an evolving situation, and we hope to get more details soon.
Can you tell where that quote came from?
This is from Mike Tobin, per his sources, on what is happening with the ICE officers on the ground there. By the way, 1 o'clock, top of the hour, 1 o'clock Eastern time, we are expecting to get a news conference on what exactly happened there. But I do believe this is Mike Tobin's reporting directly from ICE. Okay. So I believe that's attributable to ICE.
Yeah, you and I are looking at the statement, and some of it's in quotes and some not. And then just the caveat that we always say that this is an evolving situation. Things will come in. That news conference will be critical. And Emily, just look at the middle of the screen there. I don't know if we could pull out on the bottom right of what everybody else is watching, but we can see it bigger here in the studio. Just a huge number of law enforcement that are now on the scene, walking between their squad cars. Vehicles have pulled up in every single direction at 34th and Portland and South Minneapolis as they work the scene. That is a huge show of force there. You now see a line of officers that are keeping some sort of a perimeter now as well.
Well, and the line of officers is necessary because according to some of the footage that is circulating online, the rioters who were present were throwing snowballs and ice at the ICE officers who were trying to manage this scene. So the protest is still ongoing, or at least was not too long ago, in which they were actively obstructing law enforcement from doing what they needed to do on the ground. And I'll just note that this is also within the context of just a day ago, we learned that ICE officers were being told that they couldn't stay at one of the hotels in Minneapolis because the hotel didn't want to aid immigration enforcement measures. So there's clearly a coordinated effort here to prevent the federal government from simply enforcing federal immigration law. And again, this is happening in just about every sanctuary city and state around the country.
Well, and there's a fine line as these events unfold to what we will learn what occurred between, resistance and violence. And when you throw snowballs and people say that's not a big deal, what if it's a white cue ball, which I've experienced in certain situations reporting on? What if it's an ice ball, which can cut your face?
This is where the benign resistance argument falls completely flat, and frankly, is insulting to anyone with an ounce of common sense. Throwing a snowball might seem harmless on the surface, but when you are targeting law enforcement officers who are already in an high-stress, potentially violent situation, it is not benign. It's an act of aggression. And as the speaker rightly points out, what if it is not just a snowball? What if it's an ice ball or a rock or something far worse? The intent is to obstruct, to harass, and to injure. There is no such thing as a peaceful resistance. When that resistance actively obstructs the legal duties and escalates the potential for violence, this isn't just a protest, it's an attack. Officers are trained to assess threats and react to protect themselves and others. When you have a mob throwing projectiles, even seemingly innocent ones, it creates an unpredictable and dangerous environment. It forces officers to divert their attention from the primary threat, putting everyone at a greater risk. This kind of rhetoric, downplaying the severity of this action, is part of the problem. It normalizes aggressive behavior towards law enforcement and encourages more people to participate. It is a slippery slope, and we are seeing the tragic consequences. When politicians and media personalities refuse to condemn this act equivocally, they are, whether intentionally or not, giving an approval to this resistance. We need to be clear. Obstructing law enforcement, especially federal agents, doing their lawful duty, it is not resistance, it is illegal, and it is dangerous, and it can have deadly consequences. No excuses.
I mean, there's no such thing, I think, as a benign resistance whatsoever to them effectuating their duties. And we know, John, that the highest risk to officer safety is indeed in executing warrants. And here, when the sort of public writ large is encouraged to resist and does resist, then situations can unfold rapidly and without any type of stymieing that rapid escalation to here, which is of violence. And I know thus far I can't see any type of struggle in the people who have appeared thus far on our screens. It doesn't seem to be that those that have arrived are engaging in a jostling yet. I don't see that. I'm not sure if you guys do. So thus far, it seems to be, quote, peaceful in those that have descended on this particular scene right now, John.
Look, this is a result of a woke ideology possessed by the highest leadership of a state, Minnesota, which on the one hand thinks it's fine to loot the federal treasury by abusing federal programs like the welfare programs that the Congress is hearing about, and at the same time to demonize federal agents who are just trying to carry out federal law. And as you said, Emily, the toughest thing is for those agents to have to go and execute warrants. They don't know what's behind a door. They don't know who's going to try to jump on them from what direction. And for them to have to use self-defense, force in their self-defense is unfortunate, but it also gives you an indication of how heavy the resistance is, the kind of danger that is arising in places like Minneapolis. Because, again, I think state officials, local officials like the mayor, are encouraging or at least tolerating violence. But when they say things like kick all federal agents out of the state or out of the city, I think they're encouraging private citizens, unfortunately, to do something unhinged, like what we see this driver of this white car who had to be shot by ICE officers.
And thereby incentivizing it, because as he's saying, these refugee immigrant, communities, that'll take the pressure off of all of you. You got to get these guys out. I mean, that's inherent in what he's saying. That's not reading between the lines. Read his words. Based on DHS sources, this is another vehicle ramming incident and a long list. At least 100 vehicle attacks against federal law enforcement have happened since January 20th of 2025.
This is the inconvenient truth that the sanctuary city politicians desperately try to ignore. Their woke ideology is not just some harmless philosophy. It has real, tangible, and often deadly consequences. When you have leaders like Mayor Frey actively demonizing federal agents and implicitly or explicitly encourage resistance, you create a climate where unhinged individuals feel justified in committing acts of violence. It is not reading between the lines. It is actually reading the words and understanding the chilling implications. To hear that there have been over 100 vehicle attacks against federal law enforcement since January 2025. Wait, 2025? No, they meant 2021. But the point stands. That is an absolutely staggering number. 100 vehicle ramming incident. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And it is a pattern directly fueled by the rhetoric coming from this sanctuary city stronghold. When you tell the people that federal agents are the enemy, some people are actually going to take that message to its most extreme violent conclusion. These local officials are failing their most basic duty to protect their citizens and uphold the law. Instead, they are actively undermining it, creating a hostile environment for the very people who they are trying to keep us safe. And they act surprised when federal agents have to resort to self-defense. This is infuriating. This is not a game. These are lives on the line. And the blood of this incident, whether it's an officer injured or a perpetrator killed, is on the hands of the politicians. Fan the flames of division and defiance.
So we've already lived through nearly a year of this. You were talking about the real threat that something like this is on those federal officers and agents. Absolutely, that's true. I didn't say 10, I said 100.
And they need the support and cooperation of the local police. Now, these ICE agents, federal agents, DEA agents, ICE agents, ATF, they go to execute a warrant. They're not there to try to police the peace-abiding citizens around. They're just there to go and catch a criminal, catch someone who's in violation of federal law. If you have mayors, police chiefs, governors saying, we're not going to protect you. In fact, we're going to encourage people to get in the way, and we're not going to prosecute or arrest anyone who tries to attack you, then you're going to see more and more incidents like this. And this is a defiance of federal law. I think it was a mistake for the Supreme Court, unfortunately, to say that President Trump couldn't call up the National Guard, because if state officers keep doing this, the only choice that a president has And I think he has to do this, is to send in the National Guard to protect federal officers.
Sandra, I want you to comment, on that ICE release that you read earlier, because there's two important notes within that I'd love to hear feedback on. So this is the ICE release that you read, an ICE officer fearing for his life, the lives of his fellow law enforcement, and the safety of the public, fire those defensive shots. And it says, in accordance with his training, he saved his own life and that of his fellow officers.
Thank God.
And so now these ICE agents have essentially their training has to encompass a daily assault. It's not simply effectuation of duties and effectuation of warrants and arrests and the like. It actually includes assault defense constantly, which is far different from a normal position description, Sandra.
He used his training and saved his own life and that of his fellow officers. You have to think about these officers are going out there every single day knowing that they're risking their lives. We've talked to the family of these ICE agents who also feel like they are threatened and they are scared for their loved ones' lives every single day. I mean, you saw the number of percentage attacks that have gone up, the daily threats that they face just to go do their job, their lawful job, to carry out the law in the streets of America. That is why it's so sad that we are seeing what happened here. Thankfully, we are hearing all affected are going to make a full recovery. But this is an incredibly scary, dangerous situation. And the people in Minneapolis have suffered. Those who couldn't flee based on the mass exodus of the police on the streets there. I mean, I was trying to just get an updated average response time from the police there because, as you know, they transitioned to public safety officers to respond to emergency situations in that city. There are still police on the ground there, but not enough of them. I mean, their call times have gone way up to respond to actual emergencies that happen there. It has become an incredibly difficult city for so many to live in, and to have this happening now and to know that those ICE officers, they don't have the back of the city in which they are carrying out lawful operations in America. That's tough. And Emily, to your point, to have to train against it, to save yourself, that's another world.
Mike Tobin is there live on scene with us for the latest. Mike.
Well, we've got confirmation now through DHS that this was a vehicle ramming situation. They say, in fact, while ICE officers and federal agents were conducting targeted operations, they had the usual scene with the crowds descending on them. And someone, they say, DHS says, weaponized her vehicle. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the lives of other agents, discharged his weapon and shot that individual, a woman who now, according to DHS, is in fact deceased. Now, I've got some of the statement from DHS saying that this is a direct consequence of constant attacks and demonization of our officers by sanctuary politicians who fuel and encourage rampant assaults. As far as the scene out here right now, you can see some of the police presence. The tape that is up to the south of me right now.
This is where the rubber meets the road, everyone. The Supreme Court prior ruling, while perhaps well-intentioned in its historical context, has created an utterly bizarre and dangerous catch-22 for a president trying to enforce federal law in recalcitrant states. So instead of being able to deploy the National Guard, which is literally designed for domestic order, a president might have to send in the 82nd Airborne. Are you kidding me? We are talking about paratroopers, combat divisions being deployed to an American street because of a mayor decided to tweet rather than cooperate. This isn't just counterintuitive. It is an invitation to further chaos and a potential constitutional crisis. The idea that a president would have to resort to deploying active duty military before the National Guard to protect federal agents from rioters encouraged by local officials is not only absurd but terrifying. It shows how far some of these local and state leaders are willing to go in their defiance of federal authority, effectively forcing the president's hand into extreme measures. It speaks volumes about the level of resistance and utter breakdown of law and order in these sanctuary zones. When federal agents can't even execute a warrant without being attacked, local authorities are actively hostile. Something has to give, and if the Supreme Court interpretation forces a president to consider the Insurrection Act, and that is the direct consequence of the political games being played by the progressive mayors and governors. They are pushing the envelope, and they might just get the military response they are inadvertently inviting. This is serious, and it is a part we should all be deeply concerned about.
There are about 100 demonstrators, the usual scene, shouting at the ICE agents who are on the scene, shouting at the FBI that's now conducting the investigation. It did get a little raucous. Tear gas was deployed about 30, 40 minutes ago, but right now it's a pretty typical scene following any of the operations with federal officers. Guys, back to you.
Mike, thank you for that. So at this point, we know there's going to be a 1 p.m. briefing. We will take that to you live as soon as it begins. Let's get your thoughts in here on Mike's recent reporting and what we can expect next.
Well, according to some of the other reports, Mayor Jacob Frey is actually on the ground there. There are still some protesters present as well. I think it's really telling what his initial gut reaction was. Before he learned any of the facts, before he had any additional details, his gut reaction was to demonize ICE even further. And I think that really sums up what the priorities of these Democratic officials are in some of these sanctuary cities and states. Their reaction is not to immediately seek for the protection of their citizens. It's to demonize law enforcement who are there to simply enforce the federal immigration law that is on the books. That's really troubling.
I wanted to ask you further a few minutes ago, because you brought up the U.S. Supreme Court decision not to let President Trump take in the National Guard here. This tips us into territory we had prayed we wouldn't get into, but it's not completely unfamiliar. We have a death now involved in this, somebody who reportedly rammed her car against these agents, and in defense, after some violence there, we don't know all of it, she now has lost her life. There was a shooting. We saw with that detention center, one of them, we had them in Dallas and Chicago, but they had detainees. ICE had detainees in a van with no windows, and when this killer sniper decided to take shots at the van to try to hit the ICE agents, they hit one of the people that were in the van that were there as, you know, basically prisoners at this point, right? So we've seen death before. Now it's on the streets of Minneapolis. Is this a move now? Is it time now for a National Guard? And would the Supreme Court readjust its decision, get out of the way? What do you think?
Yeah, Harris, unfortunately, we have seen state officials in our history try to stop the federal government from enforcing valid law. Desegregation. After Brown versus Board of Education, these Southern governors did something similar. They tried to stop desegregation in our schools. And so there is federal law that was passed by Congress that sets a condition, and then what can you do? And the condition seems to me to have been met. You have groups of people, even maybe involving state officials, who are trying to block the enforcement of valid federal law. Here are the immigration laws. What can you do? So the Supreme Court, I think incorrectly, but the Supreme Court said you can't send in the National Guard right away until the president has tried to restore order, has tried to protect federal agents with the regular forces. Everyone used to think regular forces meant ICE agents, DEA agents, law enforcement. But the Supreme Court suggested regular forces means the armed forces of the United States. So it creates this bizarre, counterintuitive method, which is the president is going to have to send in the 82nd Airborne first, or the 101st Airborne, which, by the way, Dwight Eisenhower sent in to desegregate the schools in the South. And if that fails, only then can he send in the National Guard. So unfortunately, according to the Supreme Court, the president is going to resort to some fairly vigorous methods here.
Do you think he's justified in doing that now?
I think we can see that on the TV screens where you've got politicians saying federal agents get out, and you've seen this kind of disorder when you're just trying to execute an ICE warrant. I think this is showing that kind of resistance to federal authority.
Well, and Trump himself has also said that the Insurrection Act is very much so still on the table, in large part because of the Supreme Court ruling, which essentially left him no other choice.
Yeah, that's
if he wants to restore order on the streets, it very well may be the case that he has to invoke the Insurrection Act.
What an absolute mess. And it is a mess entirely of Minneapolis' own making, fueled by the reckless rhetoric and politically motivated grandstanding of its leadership. This isn't about compassion. It is about control, defiance, and a dangerous disregard for the rule of law. When a mayor prioritizes demonizing federal agents over ensuring public safety and upholding the Constitution. What you get is tragedy. We saw a woman lose her life, federal officers put in mortal danger, and a city plunged into further chaos, all because of a woke ideology that actively undermines law enforcement. This isn't just a Minneapolis problem. It is a blueprint for disaster playing out in the sanctuary cities across America. The constant attacks, increased threats, and the outright encouragement of resistance, it all adds up to a powder keg, and when it explodes, it's always the brave men and women in uniform and the law-abiding citizens who pay the price. It is time we demand accountability from these politicians, and it is time we support our law enforcement. And it is time we remember the rule of law isn't optional. What do you think? Let us know in the comment section below. That is all for now, everyone. If you have enjoyed this breakdown, give it a like, subscribe. It really helps the channel. Let me know your thoughts on the story in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And also, remember, always keep thinking. And I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, everyone.
All right, we're going to pull away from this for just a moment for a very short break. Breaking news in the state of Minnesota today, South Minneapolis, a shooting involving ICE, and we will get right to it again right after this.